Thank you. I'm Nick Barbash. I'm a senior here at School Without Walls. School Without Walls is a DC public school. It's a magnet school on the campus of George Washington University. And as you may be able to see behind me, we do indeed have walls. But the name refers to the fact that we use the city as a classroom, and we take a lot of field trips, and we do a lot of learning outside of the school building. We make the most of our position here in Washington, D.C. And we're very glad to have with us today Congressman Bernard Sanders from Vermont. Congressman Sanders is an independent socialist. He's the leader of the Progressive Caucus of the House of Representatives. And as a progressive school, we are very delighted to have him. So, Congressman Bernard Sanders.
Thank you very much. Do I need this? No, I don't need this, so I'll give it back to you. I am delighted to be with you. And I'm going to chat for a little while, then I'm going to stop and open it up to any questions or thoughts that you may have. And actually, this format is something that I'm very familiar with, because in the state of Vermont, this is what I do all the time. We have about 55 high schools, and I've been to almost every one of them. And the reason that I go out to high schools, and the reason that I'm delighted to be here today, is that one of the issues that concerns me very much is that young people your age, by and large, know very little about how government works, know very little about politics. When we have national elections in the United States, some of you may know that we have the lowest voter turnout of any major country on earth. We call ourselves a democracy, and yet in the last election, fewer than 40% of the people voted. And as bad as that situation is, it is worse for young people under 25 years of age. We're talking about 20 or 25% of the young people voting. And that is a very frightening development, because as those people get older, the likelihood is they will not vote, and the voter turnout will go down, down, and down. And if ordinary people and young people and working people and low-income people don't vote and don't participate in the political system, who do you think is going to be making the decisions? It will be made by the people who have the money, who will make decisions that influence the lives of your family and yourselves, and the decisions that they make, in all likelihood, are not going to be in your best interests. So the first point that I want to make this morning is, if anyone tells you that politics is crap, it's garbage, don't get involved, do not believe them for a moment. The decisions being made every single day at the nation's capital or your city government are of enormous importance to your lives. And if you don't participate, other people will fill that vacuum. So participate, learn, ask the hard questions. That's issue number one. Let me tell you a little bit about myself, because this program deals with leadership, generally speaking. My political profile and who I am and where I've come from is probably different than any other member of the United States Congress. Now, why is that? For a start, in the House of Representatives, in which there are 435 members, there is one independent. And you're looking at them. I'm the only independent in the House of Representatives. I was elected in 1990 as the first person outside of the Democratic and Republican parties in 40 years, and I'm now the longest-serving independent in American history. Now, how did I get involved in politics? How is my background different than other people? Generally speaking, most people who make it to the Congress start off in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and they work their way up and they get elected to Congress. My background is somewhat different. In 1971, a long time ago, the United States Senator from the state of Vermont died in office, and there was a special election. I ran and competed in that election as a third-party candidate, not as a Democrat, not as a Republican. I had no money, and I was affiliated with a very small progressive third party called the Liberty Union Party, 1971. And I thought, I had no illusions that I was going to win this election, but I thought it would be important to go out around the state and talk to people, expressing my views about the state of the economy, the Vietnam War as was then going on, and see how we could do. Well, on election day, the votes came in and I received not 30% of the vote, not 40% of the vote, but 2% of the vote. So the first point that I'm going to make to you today is, don't give up. But I was not smart enough, unlike many of you, I was not very smart. And I said, hey, I got 2% of the vote, I'm going to try again. And in Vermont, which I think is a good thing, we have elections every 2 years for statewide offices and so forth. So another year came in 1972, and I said, I am going to run for governor of the state of Vermont, having won overwhelming support with 2%. What do I have to lose? How much worse can I do? Well, I actually did worse. I went from 2% down to 1%. But the voter turnout was larger, so I got more actual votes, but my percentage went down. Again, being one of those people who's too dumb to know when he's licked, you know, I came back again, and 2 years later, I ran for the United States Senate again, and instead of getting 2% of the vote, I got my total all the way up to 4%. 2 years later, I ran for governor of the state of Vermont, and this time I made it up to 6%. 4 races, and I managed to fight my way up to 6%. Now, see, some of you are smiling, but what you should know, if you check your history, running as a third-party candidate, actually getting 6% of the vote, is not bad. It is very hard because people in our country traditionally, they're going to vote Democrat, they're going to vote Republican. Asking them to go outside of the two-party system with ideas that they don't necessarily see on television or hear on the radio or read in the newspapers every day, different ideas ain't so easy. So 6% wasn't that bad, but by this time I also had to make a living and do things like that, live a normal life. So I retired from politics, and then I went about my business as a writer, doing film strips, educational film strips, did a videotape, and so forth and so on. 1981, 5 years later, some people in the city that I live in, Vermont is a very small state, a very rural state. Our largest city is called Burlington, Vermont, where I live. It has all of 40,000 people. It's by far the largest city in the state of Vermont, but compared to cities all over America, very small. Anyhow, some people came up to me and they said, you know, we have a democratic machine in the city of Burlington. We have a mayor who has served, I think it was 6 terms. They're not really representing the people. They're not dealing with issues like affordable housing, creating a people-oriented waterfront. Our city is a beautiful city located on Lake Champlain. A lot of problems in our city. Bernie, why don't you run for mayor of Burlington? And I was reluctant to do it, but enough people said, do it, so we did it. And we put together an interesting coalition politics. We put together some of the unions, and I'm a strong believer in trade unionism, the workers in the city government who aren't happy with what was going on. We put together neighborhood organizations that represented working people and lower income people. We put together people who were concerned about the environment, especially what was going on in our waterfront. And lo and behold, on election day, it was a 3-way race. There was another gentleman in the race. I ended up, late in the night, winning that election in 1981 for mayor of Burlington by a landslide of 14 votes. They did a recount. My lead went from 14 down to 10. But to everybody's shock in the state of Vermont, I became the mayor of Burlington. Now, when I walked in the door as mayor of Burlington, I had a little bit of a problem, because there were 13 people on the city council. 2 of them had come in as supporters of mine. But the rest were all Republicans and Democrats, mostly Democrats. They were not very happy with the fact that a new guy, not a Democrat or Republican, was suddenly the mayor of a city who had a different agenda. So the very first formal action that the city council took was to fire my secretary. Got it? The one person that I had on my staff, they fired. And they forced me to work for many, many months they wouldn't let me hire my own administration. It was a very, very bitter and confrontational period. Got me very angry. And we have half of the city council comes up every year. So a year later in 1982, along with a number of other people in the city, we put together another coalition to run for city council, people who were supporting my initiatives as mayor. And we won 3 seats, plus the 2 that we had, which was 5 seats, which gave me veto power, which suddenly changed the balance of power on the city council. And the Democrats and Republicans suddenly had to deal with the mayor. And a year later, the Democrats and Republicans ran against me. I won. 2 years later, Democrat and Republican ran against me. I won. 2 years later, Democrat, well, they combined parties, but we won anyhow. And we took on all of the special interest in the city, all of the moneyed interest, all of the powers that be. And one of the exciting things about what I did as mayor was that we came close to doubling the voter turnout. Why did we do that? How did that happen? Because a lot of working people and lower income people who had been ignored for years saw that there was a mayor standing up, fighting the fights for them, fighting for a fairer tax system to break our dependency on the regressive property tax, fighting for a people-oriented waterfront where people can enjoy the waterfront rather than just expensive condominiums, fighting for affordable housing, fighting for youth programs. The woman who was head of our youth office eventually became my wife and did a great job in establishing after-school centers, Little League programs. We were concerned, as every sensible person is now, what happens to young people if they don't have a place to do constructive activity. So we started a teen center in the city of Burlington where kids can come and listen to their loud, terrible music, but do it on their own, and we prefer that than drugs and cigarettes and so forth. So we made sweeping changes all over the city. In 1986, I ran for governor of the state. Well, this time, while I was mayor, I did better. I got 14% of the vote, still far from winning. 1988, I ran for the Congress, and in a strange three-way race, the guy who won was a Republican. He got 34% of the vote. I got 31%. The Democrat got 19%. As slowly as you can see moving up the ladder. 2 years later, in 1990, I ran against that same fellow again and won by a whole lot. Got 56% of the vote. I think he got 40%. And I've been reelected ever since. Okay? In Congress, what I try to do is to do what too few people, I think, do. And that is stand with working people in the middle class and lower income people to make sure that we create an economy that works for everybody rather than just the very rich. And what goes on in our country today, and I don't know if they tell you it in your textbooks or what kind of teachers you have, but a lot of what really goes on is not reported in the books. The reality is that in Congress, hundreds of millions of dollars flood into the political coffers of both political parties, the Republicans much more than the Democrats. I started in 1990 a group called the Progressive Caucus, which now has some 55 members. It is the most integrated caucus, rural, urban, black, white, Hispanic, women, men. And our function is to represent working families, to make sure that all of our people in this country can have a decent standard of living. But the most important reality about politics, which is not talked about enough, is the power of money. Go to any of the websites that are out there that deal with campaign finance reform, and what you will find is that the White House, members of Congress, members of the Senate receive huge amounts of money from wealthy people, big money people. Every once in a while, you'll see the president go to a little fundraising dinner in Washington. And any of you can go to that fundraising dinner too. The only problem is, you know how much you have to pay to get into that room? About $25,000 a plate. But I want to tell you, it's a very good dinner. And you can get an extra cup of coffee. Service is very good. So for me, at $25,000, you can go to dinner with the president. Now, why do people pay the $25,000? And that's just a small part of what they pay. Because they understand when they put that money in, their needs get taken care of and not the needs of your families. So instead of talking about raising the minimum wage so that everybody in our country could have a living wage, we don't talk about that in the Congress because the people with the money are not interested in raising the minimum wage. What do they want? Well, they're millionaires and they're billionaires. That's not enough. They need a tax break. So the president's tax proposal will give the average millionaire a $90,000 tax break. The richest 1% will get 1/3 of all of the tax breaks. The same amount, the richest 1/10 of 1% will get the same amount in tax breaks as the bottom 89%. Is that fair? Of course not. It's totally absurd. So we'll cut back on education. We'll cut back on Medicaid. We'll cut back on the needs of our veterans. We'll cut back on the needs of people who are in trouble in order to give huge tax breaks to the rich. But is that an accident? No, that's the way the system works. And what I try to do, along with many other members of Congress, including your very excellent Congresswoman, Eleanor Holmes Norton, who does an excellent job, is to bring working people, the middle class, together to stand up and fight against big money, and that is a tough, tough fight. So that's a brief synopsis of how I got to where I am, and a little bit of what I am doing, but this is your program, not mine. So I'm happy to take any questions or thoughts that you may have, and please don't be shy. Okay, who has the first question?
I do.
Okay.
You said that you support the rights of the working class.
Yeah.
Why do you believe that the United States so violently tries to overthrow other forms of government, such as socialist governments, such as what happened in Chile in 1973 and in Cuba? Why is the United States responding with such moneyed interest?
Good. Excellent question. Everyone hear the question? Okay. If you look, and not enough people do, and that gets me into a whole other issue, which is the media, which I want to talk about, because I'm very concerned about the media today and the degree to which a few corporations control what we see, hear, and read. But if you check American history, you know, sometimes the president will tell you, well, we're always defenders of freedom. We believe in freedom. But if you check history, what you will find is that in many years, especially in Latin America, which way back from when President Monroe developed his Monroe Doctrine, we have the right to own Latin America, and we will tell any government there what we want to happen. That's the simple truth. So throughout our history, we have overthrown many, many governments. We didn't like their form of government. In the case of Chile, in 1973, what you had is an election in which a guy named Salvador Allende won the election. Problem is, Nixon and his friends didn't like him. Why? Because Salvador Allende fought for the poor people and the working people of that country. He believed that the resources of Chile, their copper mines and so forth, should belong to the people. And he won a free election. No one denied that for a second. It was a tough election. Didn't win by much, but he won a free election. There was another election. His party got more support. He was overthrown by the CIA and corporate interest, because corporate interest preferred, of course, that the United States companies dominate that country. And a lot of what politics is about, going way, way back to the 19th century, through England, France, is the domination of colonies so that big companies in a given country can take the resources of those countries for their own use. So I think that's what happened, and it was a very unfortunate day in American history. Allende won in a democratic election, was popular, was overthrown, and eventually killed. And in his place, a guy named General Pinochet took place, ran that country with an iron fist, killed many, many people, but he was okay. He was a good guy. Why? Because he was a friend of corporate America. Other questions? Yes, sir.
You're not a Democrat, you're not a Republican, so what kind of constituencies do you have that keep you in office?
Good question.
What groups contribute money to your...
Good question. Excellent question. You see, I think that my politics in Vermont, and in fact throughout the country, represents the vast majority of the people. Okay? So this is the coalition that we put together. We stand up for senior citizens in my state, and I've been a leader in the United States Congress in trying to lower the cost of prescription drugs. Now, you talk to some of your grandparents about whether they can afford the prescription drugs they need. It is an outrage that we have people who die in this country, who get sick because they can't pay the prices that the drug companies want them to pay, and in our country, we pay by far the highest prices in the world. So I say, with seniors, and we meet with seniors a whole lot, we're going to fight to lower your prescription drugs. We're going to fight for a strong prescription drug benefit under Medicare. And in fact, we're going to fight for a national health care program. Now, how many of you guys know which major country in the world, the only one that does not guarantee health care to all of their people? Let me see how smart you are. What is the country in the world that does not guarantee health care to all of their people? It's the United States of America. Okay. So we talk to the seniors. We talk to workers. I am on the picket line very often with workers who are fighting to create a union or to defend their rights to get a decent standard of living. And I've always had the support and get funding. Now, I don't take in terms of funding, which is a good question. Where do I get my money? Do I run for free? No. I have to take on the whole Republican National Committee, and they have a lot of money if they want to run against me. So we get some of our money from unions. We're very strong on the environment. I have a 100% voting record on the environment, so we get help from environmental groups, get help from senior groups. I think it's an outrage that in our country we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any nation on earth, so we get help from groups who are concerned about kids. But most of my funds do not come from PACs. Most of my funds, interestingly enough, and we, I think, are unique, or maybe not, maybe one or two other people in the Congress. Most of my funding comes from small individual contributions. I do not take and never have taken and never will take 1 penny from any corporation because I don't represent their interest. But all over America, people send me, and in the state of Vermont we receive whole lots of funding from people who say, Bernie, I can afford a $20 check or a $30 check or a $50 check or occasionally a couple of $100 checks. So almost uniquely in the Congress, my money comes from small contributions averaging about $33 a piece, but from huge numbers of people. Lots of people, 10, 15,000 people contributing 30 bucks a piece, you got $450,000. And then you get some money from unions and other groups. And that's how I put together my funds. But the coalition, I talk about coalition politics. And that's what we have done in the Congress as well. What the Progressive Caucus is about, we have members of the Black Caucus. We have members of the Hispanic Caucus. We have members of the Women's Caucus. We have people from big cities. We have people like myself from rural America. But our goal is that people come together, not be divided by race, by geographical district, but coming together on basic economics, saying, let's make this great country work for everybody and not just the very wealthy. Did I answer your question? Yes. Okay. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Michael, and my ideas stem off of your idea of universal health care coverage. In our country, it costs people an arm and a leg just to get sufficient health care. And Senator Kerry has been proposing his idea of what it should be like. Would you describe yourself as a supporter of his plan, or would you provide modifications, or do you altogether have your own plan as to how our country can provide universal health care coverage?
Okay, Michael, excellent question. And you're raising a question, at least in my state, and I'm sure in every other state in this country, is way up there on the top. So let's just deal with a couple of facts, and I'm glad you asked us this. As I mentioned a moment ago, and as you understand, disgracefully, the United States is the only country in the industrialized world of wealthy nations that does not guarantee health care to all people. Now, if tomorrow somebody were to say that in the city of Washington, or in the state of Maryland, or in the state of Virginia, or in the state of Vermont, you can't go to school unless your family has $50,000 a year. People say, well, that's crazy. Everybody has a right to an education. But do you know, way back when, that wasn't always the case. Public education came because people fought. They said, our kids are as good as the wealthy kids, and they deserve an education and an equal opportunity. Other countries have made that assumption correctly about health care, all right? Everybody can get sick. Everybody can get hit by a car. Everybody can come down with a terrible disease. Now, why should it be in this country that if somebody has a lot of money, they can go to the best hospitals, the best doctors in the country, but if you're a working class person and you work in a place where they don't provide health care or minimal health care, you're going to go bankrupt paying for that, and you're clearly not going to, despite what anyone tells you. If you think the middle class or working class gets the same type of health care as the rich, you're fooling yourself. All right? So most countries in the world have come up with different formulations. All right? But what you should know, I spoke last year, it was a very funny thing. I talked to kids from England and college kids, and I said, well, show me your health care card. And they all laughed. In England, everybody has health care. They don't even have a card. Go to the doctor of your choice and so forth and so on. Here are the facts about health care. Number one, 41 million Americans have no health insurance. On top of that, there are many, many more who are underinsured. Michael, what do I mean by underinsured? Do you know what I mean by that?
That you don't have sufficient, you wouldn't be able to raise sufficient funds to get the health care you need to provide for your illnesses.
Right. You may have some health care coverage to cover you if you got hit by a bus, but you have a large deductible. And you know you're sick, but you're not going to go to the doctor because you can't come up with that $100, right? Okay. Meanwhile, we spend twice as much per person. Here's the first point to make. Compared to all the other systems in the world which provide health care to all of their people, we spend twice as much per person as any other country. Now, why is that? Because to a large degree, our system is not geared to provide the best quality health care to all of the people. It is geared primarily for what? What is it geared for? What are the insurance companies there for? What is the drug companies there for? What? Profit. Profit. So here you have a situation, let's just deal with the drug companies. Year after year, the drug companies are the most profitable industry in America, and yet they charge the American people the highest prices in the world. They pay their CEOs, in some cases, tens of millions of dollars a year. But they contribute huge amounts of money to campaigns, campaign contributions, advertising. They have 600 lobbyists on Capitol Hill alone. Very, very powerful. When you see the president do a fundraiser, mark my words, the drug companies will not be far away. Okay? So the first thing we have to do is create a healthcare system which is not based on profit and greed, but on providing good quality healthcare to all people. I believe in what is called a single-payer system. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept. And basically what it says is you don't need private insurance companies, that what we should have, and I believe it should be administered at the statewide level, because I think it would be more efficient to do that rather than in Washington. But essentially, everybody has one card, you're in one publicly funded insurance company, and it provides freedom of choice and quality care to every American. We can do it. Study after study has shown that you can do that without spending any more money than we're currently spending and providing health care to all people. You take the profit motive out of it, you take the bureaucracy out of it. You have one insurance company, he has another insurance company, he has another. It is a huge amount of bureaucracy which we waste money on. We want to put money into health care, and a simple system, publicly funded, can do that. Okay? Other questions? Yes, please.
Hi, how do you feel about the University of Michigan undergraduate and law school cases on affirmative action?
I believe in affirmative action. I believe in affirmative action. And I think given the history of our country, affirmative action, not only for minorities but for women, is appropriate. So that's the simple answer. Other questions? Yes, sir.
You said that you represent the views of a majority of Americans.
I believe you do, yeah.
Why do you think that the Republican Party now controls the entire Congress and the White House? Is the liberal coalition sort of
Well, let me tell you something. I'm not a liberal. I'm a progressive, and there's a difference. Now, I'm kind of liberal, but I am more of a progressive than I'm a liberal. And I want to talk about that. But let's talk about why the Republicans are doing so well, because that's an important question. Now, why would a party be doing well when they're providing hundreds of billions of dollars to the wealthiest 1% in tax breaks? Well, we can understand that the richest 1% will be very delighted with them, right? But what about the other 99%? Why do they get some of those votes? Well, there are a couple of reasons. Let me go to an issue that I'm now spending a great deal of time on, and I want you to think and think hard about. Okay, it is the media. We're on C-SPAN. Let me congratulate C-SPAN for doing what I consider to be an excellent job, allowing people with different points of view to be heard all over America. But C-SPAN is only one small part of the whole media scheme of things. Who owns NBC? Does anybody in this room know who owns NBC? No? You see, you should be knowing these things and you should be thinking about this. Who owns NBC? Is NBC just a little old independent company that out there trying to get all the news and presenting all points of view? NBC is owned by General Electric, one of the largest corporations in America. What might be the conflicts of interest between a company like General Electric and NBC, the outlet that it owns, the network that it owns? Is there a conflict of interest, or do you think that NBC will be, General Electric really wants to give you all points of view? What do you all think? What's their bias? Do you think they're going to stand up for, do you think they are going to focus on the needs of working people? Let me give you an example. General Electric, like many other large corporations, over the last 20 years, has laid off large numbers of American workers. Our manufacturing base in America is disintegrating. You all know what I'm talking about when I talk about that? It's not talked about very much. You don't see that on television. What do I mean about that? Many of our parents worked in factories. I know it's not a sexy job, but they were able to make a decent amount of money. Where are those jobs gone? Overseas. To what countries? All right. Why do companies like General Electric run to China? How much does a worker in China make? Well, they make something. I don't know. Give me an idea. I want you to study these things. And by the way, before I go further and forget, we have a website, which is a good website. We update it every day. It's called bernie.house.gov. bernie.house.gov, or you can get it through the congressional website process under Vermont. Okay? And we talk about these issues. But here, I'm just going to give you an example about General Electric. General Electric, a very large corporation, which has laid off, my guess is hundreds of thousands of American workers, at least tens of thousands over the years. Rather than paying somebody in the United States 15 or 20 bucks an hour, a living wage, they prefer to throw that person out on the street and go to China. In China, they pay people 30 cents an hour, 40 cents an hour. They don't have to worry about unions, because if anyone tries to form a union in China, they get thrown in jail. They don't have to worry too much about environmental regulations, because the Chinese government wants to attract industry, doesn't have too much in the way of environmental regulations. It's a great place to do business. Now, do you think that NBC will be talking about that issue too much? No, I don't think that they will. Okay? General Electric throughout its history has been anti-union. They don't like unions. Do you think they're going to be talking about how you can form a union, or the fact that workers in unions make 25% more than non-union workers? Do you guys know that? No, I don't think so. General Electric owns a lot of financial services, investment companies, and so forth. Are they going to talk about the power of investment companies and how some of them can screw consumers? I don't think so. And it's true for all the other companies. There's a guy named Rupert Murdoch. How many of you have heard of Rupert Murdoch? Who is Rupert Murdoch? Well, he owns a lot more than Fox. Rupert Murdoch is a gentleman from Australia whose father owned media in Australia. And he took that and expanded in Australia, expanded in England, expanded in Eastern Europe, is now in China, and owns in this country the New York Post and Fox Television. He is an extreme right-wing billionaire. And when you watch Fox Television, you should not have any illusions that you're watching an independent television network. What you're watching is an adjunct of the Republican Party. Every one of their hosts are extreme right-wing, and that is true for other cable stations as well. Very serious problem. And one of the issues that I am working on is that in a time in America, we have a handful of corporations like General Electric, Viacom, huge corporation owning CBS, Disney, huge corporation owning ABC, AOL Time Warner, huge corporation owning CNN, Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation owning Fox, New York Post, other media outlets all over the world. As bad as that situation is, who owns the Washington Times? Yeah, what about that guy? Does he believe in democracy? Well, you should study it. It is important to understand who owns what. Washington Post is owned by a big corporation. Are they focusing on the needs of ordinary people? Do they deal with the real issues? Give you one example. Of all of the economic issues facing our country today, I'm going to throw out a very simple one, and I want you to think about it, because you guys are the future of this country. I want you to understand it. In the last 30 years, we have seen an explosion of technology, right? When I was your age, they didn't have computers. They didn't have emails. They didn't have faxes. It was Mayor Burlington, a big revolution. We got a fax machine in City Hall. Okay, you're all laughing. You think that's ancient history. It's not ancient history. 20 years ago. Now, with all, you have robotics, you have factories that are much more productive. The point being that every worker in America is much more productive with all of that technology, correct? Would you assume that given the explosion of that technology and all of the skills that American workers now have, you would assume that the average American worker is now working fewer hours, making more money? That your parents are saying, wow, man, 30 years ago, they used to have to work 40, 50 hours a week. Isn't it great? We can work 25 hours a week now because we have all of that technology, and we have really solid middle-class incomes, no problem sending you guys to college. Healthcare is not a problem. Taking care of grandma. Is that the reality? So the $64 question is, what happened in a 30-year period with all of the technology? And the reality is that the average American today, not the rich, but the average American is working longer hours for low wages. In my state, it is not uncommon. We're a rural state. We're not a poor state, but we're on the lower end of things. It is not uncommon at all to speak to workers who do not work one job, do not work two jobs, but occasionally work three jobs. Now, how did that happen? With all of that technology, why is not our standard of living for the average middle-class person going up? But while the middle class is disappearing in many ways, shrinking, what's happening to the people on top? They are getting richer by the barrelful. In the last 20 years, the people on top have made out like bandits. And now, of course, they want more in the way of tax breaks. How often do you see that issue discussed on television? Oh my God, they must have missed that issue. But the latest scandal, what about that Peterson case? You see a little bit about that? Every night. What about O.J. Simpson? You heard about that? Every night. But you see, what the media will do is not deal to a large degree with the issues facing the middle class and explain, okay, if the middle class is shrinking, if we have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world, if the rich have gone phenomenally richer, we got a problem. And now we may disagree as to how we solve that problem. We got to lay it on the table so that we can begin. What kind of society we want? Michael here raised the question about health care. You believe in health care for all people, Michael? Yeah. How many of you believe in health care for all people? Raise your hands. Well, you know what? So do the people in Vermont. So do the people all over America. Not the President of the United States, not the Congress. Okay? Why aren't we discussing that reality about how we can have a health care system that shouldn't cost us any more than the current health care system? It ain't going to be on NBC very often. I can tell you that. We won't talk about that. Every scandal in the world, you'll talk about every crime in the world. One of you guys throws a brick through a window, you'll make it on the front pages. But if you sit down and you do your work and you're thoughtful about things, you may never make it at all. Workers do not get their views, their needs expressed. And the result is, of that, is that a lot of good people who work day and night, they say, hey, must be something wrong with me. I'm working 50, 60 hours a week. And no one's talking about my needs. I'm not going to vote. It's all crap. And that's part of the system of what they want to. They don't want, to be honest with you, the people who own America do not want you voting. They do not want you participating in the political system. They'd rather have a system in which the rich contribute huge amounts of money to the Republican Party, maybe to the Democratic Party. They'll make decisions for those people, but not for you. That's why you have got to turn that around. But my point about the media is, and you can do this increasingly with the internet, read alternative sources. Read magazines that are not necessarily mainstream magazines. Know who owns the media that you're reading. Read Fox, watch Fox. Understand this comes from an extreme right-wing perspective. Then read other magazines that give you, and other outlets that give you different points of view. But when you ask me that question, that's one of the reasons. I think the media does a terrible job in addressing and talking about the needs of the middle class. I'll give you another answer because you asked a good question. The question is, how does the Republican Party do so good? And now I'm going to tell you something that very few people in Congress would tell you. If you are the Republican leadership, and this is what your goals are to give huge tax breaks to the very richest people in this country. Your goals are ultimately to privatize Social Security so that Wall Street can make money from that. Privatize Medicare so the insurance companies can make more money. Privatize education. Do away with public schools. If those are your goals and you said that to the American people, you think you get a lot of lower. There are many members of the Congress today, Republicans, who not only will not raise the minimum wage, which is $5.15 an hour, you know what they will tell you, honestly? They believe in abolishing the minimum wage. Did you know that? Check it out. Telling you the truth. So that if Americans can work for $3 an hour or $2 an hour, not a problem. Now, if you had an agenda like that and you went before the American people, tax breaks for the rich, destruction of Medicare, destruction of Social Security as we know it, lowering the minimum wage or abolishing it, how many votes do you think you'd get? Not a whole lot. Maybe the richest 1% would vote for you. But that's not a lot of votes. So what do? I've got a problem. You package it. How do you package it? And here's, I want you to pay attention to me. Because this is bad stuff. I don't mind debating people who say, I was on the Hannity show, Sean Hannity yesterday, and Hannity, extreme right-wing guy, he thinks he loves these tax breaks for the rich and so forth, so we had a little bit of a discussion about that. Actually, it was a loud discussion, matter of fact. But I don't mind people who are upfront about that. Okay, give the rich more tax breaks, but that doesn't win you elections. So this is what you do. What you do is divide people up. When you asked me your question, how do I get elected? I said, I try to bring people together. We fight for women's rights. We support the rights of minorities. We support the rights of workers. We bring the majority of people together. And occasionally, honest people will have differences of opinion. In this room, there will be differences of opinion. But everybody in this room is in agreement that everybody should have health care, right? Question number 2, should we increase funding for education or should we lower funding for education? Raise your hand if you think we should increase funding for education. Okay, you're on the side of the vast majority of Americans. Okay. So on those issues, we bring people together. Now, what do the Republicans try to do? And they use it in what we call, kind of language that they not upfront about. What do? We divide people up by races. Affirmative action becomes one issue. All them black people are getting the jobs that we white people used to have. Split people, working class, white against black, instead of working together to create decent jobs for all. Those uppity women now, they want the right to choose. We'll split people on the abortion issue. We'll split people up on the gun issue. We'll split people up on religious issues. Do you follow what I'm saying? So you split people up, and then they end up, if you're a middle-class person, voting against your own interests, and the rich go laughing all the way to the bank. Okay? And they very often play white workers off against everybody else. And we try to bring people together to say, look, we're all in this boat together, whether you're black or white, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're Muslim, whatever you may be. Everybody needs health care. How do we create a health care system that works for all people? Not divide people up. Everybody knows that the kids, young people, do not make it into the middle class unless they have a decent college education. So how do we make college education accessible to all people? Not an expensive proposition, a tiny, tiny fraction of the president's tax breaks for the rich, if we put into financial aid, would make sure that every young person in this country could go to college without going deeply into debt. You know what? The vast majority of the people support us. But in order to do that, we've got to bring everybody together. And many of these, not all, and I'm not here to disparage all Republicans. Some very decent people happen to be conservative. I respect that. But some people who I don't respect will play off women against men, black against white. Oh, the gay issue, very, very big issue. Okay? Straight against gay, right? We're all supposed to hate gay people, so we split that group up. And then the argument, some of us are not patriotic. We had concerns about the war in Iraq. I voted against giving the president authority to the war in Iraq. Well, that makes us unpatriotic. We hate America. Divide those things up. And that's how they succeed. And they succeed with the help of the media. Because the media will not talk about how, in a sense, the common problems that Americans face and how we bring people together. And that's what I believe. I believe that on issues like everybody in this room thinks, I think, that instead of giving tax breaks to the rich, we should increase federal aid to education. Anyone disagree with that? Well, you know what? Most Americans agree with that. All of you think that every American should be entitled to health care. I suspect most of you think we should not have a trade policy which allows corporations to throw American workers out on the street and run to China. Most Americans agree with that. And our job is to bring people together on common interest, and some of these extreme right-wing people, you watch the issues that they talk about. Affirmative action they use to divide. The issue of abortion they use to divide. The issue of guns they use to divide. And our job is to say, let's focus on basic economic issues. How do we expand the middle class? This is a great country. Why is it the average American is working longer hours for low wages than 30 years ago? Let's talk about that. Okay? Okay, that was a long answer to a good question. I apologize for going on too long. Other questions? Yes. Let me get to, did you ask the first one yet? No, you didn't. She did. Okay, yes.
I just wanted to know how you felt about school vouchers, and do you feel that they benefit public schools?
How do I feel about school vouchers and?
How do you feel that they benefit public schools?
No. No, they certainly don't benefit public schools. Ultimately, this is an effort to destroy public education. What public education is about is, for a start, saying that we're going to provide the best quality that we can to every young person in America. Are we doing a particularly good job? No. We could do a lot better job, no question about it. We should make our public schools the best schools in the entire world. We should make you study harder, okay? We should be paying teachers the kind of salaries they deserve for doing the important work that they do. Do you know, and an issue that I've been involved in, I'm going to answer your question, it's an excellent question, but before you guys got to school, some of you, especially if you come from working families, you went to childcare. I don't know, any of you guys go to childcare when you're little? Or you have brothers and sisters in childcare? Do you know that childcare workers in many instances are paid less than McDonald's workers? And here they are dealing with the formative years of a child's life, both emotionally and intellectually. We're paying childcare workers $6 or $7 an hour, no benefit, huge turnover. All right? This has to do with national priorities. To my mind, if we're serious about loving our country, then the most precious resource that we have is our children. We should not have the highest rate of poverty in the industrialized world. We should not be underfunding education. Do you know that in America, and you'll forgive me for my ignorance, because you'll tell me the answer to this. I don't know what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now. But I do know that in many parts of America, you know what's happening? We're not bringing in more teachers. What are we doing because of the crisis? We are firing teachers. We are lowering the number of hours the kids go to school. But we have money for tax breaks for the rich and corporate welfare. So to answer your question, what vouchers are about, what public education was about, is education for democracy. We bring everybody in the community together. Some are rich, some are poor, some are black, some are white, and we learn how to live together, how to discuss things together, how to love each other as American citizens, respect each other, and we pride ourselves on what we learn. Well, some right-wing Republicans don't like anything that is public. They believe in private, private, private. So what they want to do is take money out of public education and say, we're going to start a private school. Now, when you start a private school, some private schools are great, not against private schools. In America today, most of the kids who go to private schools come from upper-income families. Pay their teachers. Schools are very, very good. It's the breeding ground for the, very, very wealthy. Now, what they want to do, if you start a private school, what we will say in the private school is, okay, we're going to start a private school, and unless you have a following admission level, unless you have exams, you can pass exams of this level, unless you're a really good kid in school, you're not going to get into that room. You're not going to get into our private school. Or maybe you have a disability. You're not going to get into that school. So we're going to take the cream of the crop. Now, that may be a very good school. And it costs money to have that school. What happens to the rest of the kids who may not have done so good on an exam when they were 7 years of age? Well, we don't have quite that much. We're going to dump them into that school over there. Yeah, there'll be 40 or 50 kids in a class, but we got that good school over there. So I believe that we adequately fund education in this country, which we're not doing. What we have done with education in America is leave it to the cities and towns. In my state, a small rural state, education is primarily funded through the property taxes, which is a regressive property tax. In our last statewide elections, 42 towns said they could not vote to increase property taxes. Meanwhile, federal aid to education, whether it's special education or whatever, is minimal. So to answer your questions, no, I do not believe in vouchers. I believe their ultimate goal is to destroy public education, to have a segregated educational system, not primarily on race, but on class. And that is wrong. We have got to, if we're serious about the future of this country, then we're serious about education. You fund it. Respect your teachers. We should have the best people in America going into teaching, and they should be paid commensurate with their responsibility, which is important. People who educate you play a very important role. We've got to respect that. Okay, other questions? Yes, please.
You're saying that the majority of Americans share your views on issues like healthcare, and I'd like to believe that's true. What do you think needs to be done to get the majority viewpoint expressed in places like Congress, in the Supreme Court, in the White House?
Well, you need a political revolution. Other than that, it's not difficult. That was a joke, guys. All right. The issue is that money has so much power in this country. Okay, this is the power of money. Money owns the media. So they will tell you, basically, they will focus on issues that they want to focus on and ignore important other issues like the healthcare crisis and the need for a national healthcare system. Money determines who gets elected to the Congress. The president, as I understand it, will be spending $200 million on radio and television ads, primarily TV, for his primary election to become the Republican candidate for president. Guess what? President does not have any opponents. $200 million. Where does that money come from? Well, it'll come from the wealthiest people in this country. So what's the antidote to that, which is pretty tough stuff? The antidote is real campaign finance reform that says to the president or anybody else or any candidate for Congress, you can't take out, we have members in the Senate, my guess is, could be wrong about this, I don't think I am, but about 1/3 of the United States Senate is millionaires. What do you think about that? 1/3 of the people you know millionaires? More and more people are running for office who are rich themselves. So what they do is they take out their checkbook and they write themselves a check for $50 million and they're off and running and they got a good campaign. Do you think that's what democracy should be about? So what you need is campaign finance reform, which basically says, in a democracy, I don't have the right to outspend this guy by 20 to 1 because I'm rich. There'll be a maximum amount that can be spent. So campaign finance reform is very important. Opening up the media, and again, C-SPAN, I think, does a good job. But demanding that media is not just owned by large corporations. And by the way, if the president's deregulation media effort is successful, the FCC will allow fewer corporations to control the media. You'll be seeing cities in America where there'll be one company that owns television, radio, and newspapers. So you've got to democratize the media and allow different points of view. Ultimately, to answer your question, we will not be successful if we have voter turnouts of 40% and if 20% of the young people vote. You guys are the future. And you have got to participate in the political process. When the majority get moving, if we have 70 or 80% voter turnout, our side wins. If it's a 40% voter turnout, their side wins. And the last point, again, is I think coalition politics. You bring people together around common interests. But it means understanding that politics is important, and all of you. You don't have the luxury, in my view, of saying, oh, I don't want to get involved in politics. If you don't want to get in politics, then your job that you're hoping to get may go to China. You may not be able to go to college. When you get sick, you may not have health insurance. If you have little kids, little brothers or sisters, they may not have good child care. So if you don't want to get involved in politics, that's fine. But that's the reality facing you if you don't. Other questions? Yes?
I want to know, what was your position on the Welfare Reform Bill of 1996?
I voted against it. Yeah. Okay, I think, see, that's a good question, getting back to his point. And that is, how do the Republicans win? Well, what they do is they take the middle class, who is working now very, very hard, people working 50, 60 hours a week, and they say, do you know where all your money is going? It's going to take care of all those lazy people who just don't want to work. And a lot of people believe that. So, do we need welfare reform? Sure we do. Is welfare a good thing? No. But what we want to do, if you have a young mother with 2 young kids, you got to take care of those. You got to make sure that the kid grows up with dignity. Should we be able to try to educate that mother, get her a good job? Absolutely. To do that, what are the things you need? You certainly need education, you need childcare, you need transportation. What you don't want to do, and especially as the economy goes south and gets worse, you don't want to say to somebody, well, we're taking away all of your benefits for your kids, there are no jobs, good luck to you. Well, how am I supposed to provide health care for my kids? Not my business. So welfare reform is good depending on what it means. But what that was about was an effort to really turn the middle class against the poor. You with me? Okay. So I voted against that bill.
How do you feel about D.C. being taxed without being represented?
Well, you see, I'm in a funny position. How many folks are there in D.C.? Anyone know? 570,000? Well, in my state of Vermont, there are 620,000 people. So we're the 3rd smallest state in America. We're a little bit bigger than Washington, D.C. We have 2 United States senators and 1 United States congressman who has full voting rights. What do you guys got? Well, you have 1 excellent congresswoman, but she doesn't have the right to vote in many instances. Is that fair? So I come from a state which is just a hair bigger than you guys, so I can't say that that's fair. It's not fair. So I believe that Washington, D.C. should be treated as national capitals are all over the world, and people here should have full representation in the United States Congress. Now let me ask you a question, which I suspect you know the answer. Why don't you have that representation? Raise your hand and tell me why. Somebody who hasn't talked yet. Some of the silent guys. We have any silent ones? All right, who wants to tell me why you think Washington does not have that representation? Yes. Right here.
Well, it's been turned into a partisan issue for many.
It is a partisan issue.
For many Republican.
What's the answer? Simple answer. Let's not beat around the bush. What's the answer? What? What percentage of the vote did George Bush get in Washington, D.C. in the last election? What?
7.
7 or 8%. All right. Gore got 10 or 15 times more than Mr. Bush. Do you think the Republicans are going to allow for 2 United States senators and 1 full voting member of the House of Representatives in a city which is certainly never in the foreseeable future going to vote Republican? No. Period. End of discussion. That's the issue, and then we'll go on for long speeches about da-da-da-da-da, but that's the reality. That's the simple reality. Everybody knows that reality. Now, if you wanted to get 2 United States senators and 1 full voting member, you have to vote Republican, then you'll get it. But so long as the politics is what it is right now, because right now, who controls the United States Senate? 50-49 and 1 independent. It is from the state of Vermont, by the way, in the Senate for the Republicans. And if you had 2 United States senators there who were not Republican, and this is a progressive city, so it's not only that it would not be Republicans, they would be at least progressive Democrats, maybe independents, closer to my point of view. That is not something that the moneyed interests want to see in the nation's capital.
We have time for one more quick question for the Congressman.
Hi, my name is Tanisha, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the youth. I feel
About the
youth programs and different things. Yes, money has a lot of power, but I also feel that the public voices have power too. And I also wanted to point out different points about, I think that a lot of youth, although we don't come out in large numbers, I think a lot of youth in this school and in DC are doing things about like just different issues, affirmative action. We have a BAM meetings here, and we also have different other things. And I also want to know what other programs do you believe should be put into place about youth, and how can we like get to just to talk to the congressman? How can we make our voices be heard?
Okay. In my state, as I've indicated, despite a very busy schedule, I have tried to go to every high school in the state because I think meetings like this are terribly important. And I think you have the right. You're citizens of this country, and you'll be voting in a few years. But even if before that, you have the right to hear what members of Congress believe, and you have the right to question them and say, look, these are our concerns. That's what democracy is about. So what I would do is write a letter to your local leaders, to the people you want, and bring them right here into the school. And many of them will come, I believe, okay? You have power. If you say, look, here's a letter signed by 80 people. Please come and talk to us about A, B, and C. We're concerned about it, okay? That's number one. Number 2, in terms of youth issues in general, the first thing that I want to say to you is you are a very bright group of young people, and I'm sure you wouldn't be here if you weren't, and you're hard workers. What we have got to fight for is to make sure that every person in this room and every young person in America who wants to go to college is able to go to the college of his or her choice, she can get into that college, without worrying about the financial implications. Right now, kids are getting out of college $30,000, $40,000 in debt. Do you know that? And a lot of lower income kids are saying, gee, I don't know if I want to go get $30,000, $40,000 in debt because there may not be a job there when I get out, okay? That's absurd. So I want young people all over America to say, we got to work on that issue. Immediately what we should be doing is opening up schools 24 hours a day. If you want to be here to study at 10 o'clock in the evening, you should be able to have access to that. In Vermont, we're now trying to get health care facilities into schools, dental care, doctors into schools to take care of the special needs of young people. But the main point that I want to make on that question, never forget this. Don't let anyone beat you down. You are citizens of the United States of America, and you have a right to make demands on the system. You have a right to say, excuse me, I want a decent job, I want health care, I want good quality education. I'm as good as anybody else, even if my family is not that wealthy. And we're going to fight for those rights. That's the best part of American history. In some ways we have come a long way, in some ways we haven't. But if we stick together, we not get divided up by race, by religion, by geographical district, urban, rural, whatever it may be, we can succeed in doing those things, okay? So first of all, I just want to conclude by applauding you all for your interest in politics, in government. This is your country, and you study the issues, and you fight for what you think is right, okay? Thank you all very much.
Good morning, Congressman, and thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome to School Without Walls. On behalf of our students, our faculty, and certainly our parents, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for what I'm sure, knowing my children, was a very engaging conversation, to say the least. And as a token of our appreciation, we'd like you to become a Walls Penguin, an honorary penguin.
Thank you very much.
Penguins
Given that
are
it's
very
raining
honorable.
outside, this is doubly
Perfect.
appropriate.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, thank you for doing a wonderful job, and you certainly have some great young people here.
Yes, they're fabulous. Premier School, Washington, D.C. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like to take a picture with them? You want to come on up here? And remember, after the promise meetings, if you guys don't mind staying, I have something to tell you guys about our project, okay? Think you guys will be Yes. Yeah, I'll tell you guys about that, so you guys will do some Yeah, the principal can come and get right in right next to the congressman, and we'll see how we can fit everybody.
Did you guys have fun? Was that interesting?
Yes.
I'm going to take 2 pictures, that way I can divide the room up. There's one. 2. If you would wait for just 1 second while how many of you all know about digital cameras?
Fancier they are, the less they work.
1, 2. Thank you again. Appreciate you.
Hold up, real quick. Thank you. 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Hey Tina, can we get just a picture with Teresa and myself? Yes, most definitely. If you all want to go ahead and sit back down, I'll talk to you guys a little bit about a project we're doing today.
Sure, my pleasure.
Still recording. All right. 1, 2, 3.
Your favorite federal funds for school regional
Just so you all know, the news this morning was that Christy Todd Whitman, who was supposed to be our speaker, just resigned from the EPA. So that's probably why she canceled out.
Why she canceled? Why did she resign?
Because she's sick of Bush's.
Stopping her from doing what she wants to do.
I don't know if
We don't speculate. On a brighter note, one of the things that we are doing in conjunction with students and leaders and bringing this is good. How many of you are seniors in here? Yes. Well, right now what we're doing is doing a $25,000 scholarship competition that's in conjunction with the Students and Leaders project that we're doing. And we've been to 40 schools over the past, we're still a couple more tomorrow and Friday.